Welcome in, everybody. Evan Valenti filling in for Adam Kaufman this week. Adam, of course, on vacation, a very well-deserved vacation. I feel like we all deserve vacation at this point. I feel like a lot of people across the entire country are working their ass off collectively, and we could all use a little bit of a break. So when you can get it, take it, please, for your own mental health. If you can find an opportunity to get a little vacation going on, please do take it. Again, Evan Valenti filling in for Adam here this week. Joined by a man with many titles at this point. He works for Celtics blog. You see him there. He's with Boston Sports Journal now. Him and I were just talking about, pre-show, some stuff that he's working with Syracuse.com. He's literally all over the place. He's back from Vegas. He's formerly a producer of this show. It's my man, Bobby Manning. Bobby, what's going on? Good morning, sir.
Good morning. This is exciting. I was telling you right before we came on too. I was really excited for this because I've been listening to this show back to Larry H. Russell, and when he had it going like 10 years ago, whatever it was at this point. Yeah. So I'm thrilled to be on here. I've always enjoyed the shows you've done on here, and Adam's, I'd assume, chasing some kids around, so it's probably not a full vacation. But
well, I'll say this: Adam is very family oriented, and his kids and his family mean a lot to him. I'm sure he's handling all three of them with class and style and grace and all of those things. Adam, we miss you. Enjoy your vacation, my friend. Yeah, Bobby's been doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes for us for a very long time, and is now just getting himself thrusted into the Celtic insider reporter world. I'll just be flat out honest before we get into anything on this show. This show would not exist without Bobby Manning, to be frankly honest with you. The amount of stuff that we threw at Bobby consistently every single week, just with us, never mind the other stuff that Bobby was doing at CLNS behind, like as a production guy doing all the videos and stuff. This company would not exist without Bobby Manning. So Bobby, again, before we even get into some stuff, I just got to give you a quick shout out here for all the help that you gave us throughout the entire season last year. And again, I was like, I feel like I'm bugging this guy. You know, like that feeling where you're like, I'm giving this guy like so much work. I don't even really want to talk to him because I feel like as soon as he sees a text message from me, he's just gonna be pissed.
No, but it was good to have the work during the early days of the pandemic. It really was a perfect job because you could just sit around and do it at home, which I love. Like I love just being able to wake up and hop on the computer like this and still be doing it to this day. But CLNS, this is I think a lot of people who have been in this industry have often said like it's an industry of no. Like you do get it rejected on a lot of stuff, whether it's jobs or ideas or this or that. And that's kind of how I found it when I first got started. And CLNS has been yes, like every time. Like, can I cover this? Can I do this? Can I do that? Can I, do some shows? Can I be on this? Can I be on that? And they've just given me so many different opportunities over the years that that's really allowed me to kind of jump into the career that I've had so far. So, I mean, I got a lot of love for Nick, you, John, Adam, even. Like Adam was one of the first people I ever talked to in this industry about getting going. So it's really become like a family around here, and I'm really appreciative for everybody at this company.
Well, Bobby is fresh from Vegas, and we'll get to Vegas Summer League stuff a little bit later in the show because I have a lot of thoughts. I'm sure Bobby has one or two as well. We'll get to all that stuff. But I want to start with some news first, just to get some stuff out of the way. We have a lot of actually some interesting news things to talk about. The first one, obviously, is Marcus Smart. He gets a contract extension. One of the things that was in limbo this offseason, the Marcus Smart contract extension talks and Rob Williams's contract extension talks. Well, we get Marcus's new deal, 4 years, $77 million, kicks in, of course, next season, gives Smart a little more stability. People, of course, very I would say entrenched in their feelings on Marcus Smart. You either love him or hate him. I think everybody that follows me on Twitter or has watched this show, I might have things like negative things to say about Marcus Smart from time to time, but he's one of my favorite Celtics ever. I love the guy. I love rooting for him. And I'm pumped that he's in green. I was pretty shocked to see that Stephen A. Smith he did like a minute and a half on why he loves the Marcus Smart deal for the Boston Celtics. So that's something that I didn't see coming. Bobby, where are we at with Marcus? Good deal for Marcus, bad deal for Marcus, good deal for the Celtics. Where are you at with this whole Marcus Smart extension here?
Well, my first reaction was it was a bit of a change of pace for the team in terms of their plans. I thought that they were going to try to push as much cap space in the next offseason as possible. So I didn't think a smart extension went hand in hand with that. I do think from my reaction to that initial Bradley Beal plan that we all started dreaming and imagining is that it was going to be a little too thin on that roster. And like just getting him onto the team in terms of a max salary structure at that point would have been such a squeeze. But I do think there's some things that have changed on that front. Obviously, the Wizards have kind of reinforced themselves a little bit, gotten Beal to be at least comfortable going into next offseason. But on Dome Theory, I had Jake Fisher on last week or 2
Yeah, it
weeks
was
ago at
great.
this point, and he thinks Beal's going to sign that mega extension super max thing with the Wizards out there, which would obviously make it necessary if the Celtics were ever going to acquire Beal to trade for him. So the smart thing makes so much sense on the books. Like you increase the salary structure, you get rid of all the uncertainty going in next off season, possibly losing him outright, which would have been an absolute disaster after all the players that they've lost over the years here. But it makes so much sense from a cap perspective that it really is hard to argue against. And people are so keyed into the numbers and all that stuff at this point that I do think that kind of dulled the argument here. But if we're simply talking about smart as a pillar of the organization going forward, and it's kind of that third piece with Jason and Jalen and Beal doesn't end up coming in that kind of scenario, I do think it actually becomes an interesting debate because we saw what that big three sort of looks like last year, and it wasn't great. There was a lot of offensive pressure on Marcus Smart to facilitate, score, do a bunch of things on the offensive side of the ball that I think pulled away from the normal defensive impact that he's able to put out there. There's a guy that plays a very physical brand of basketball that I think has led itself to injuries and a little bit of a physical decline sooner than you would see in other players. So I do think there's reason to be a little bit skeptical about like committing to him as a third piece here. But you also have to ask, like, what's the alternative? I think losing him would be a disaster. He's a really, really good player. I think that gets lost a lot in the conversation about him because everyone always talks about the intangibles. But in terms of his actual basketball skill set, he's an awesome passer, great floor general vision, all those things, and is such a strong defender that I still think he can be a centerpiece of your defense. So, all in all, they're almost fortunate that the extension was capped at 77 million because I think that's the perfect number for him. Like if you got closer to 100, if you were talking those scary Terry numbers that we saw with the Hornets, I think then you'd probably be getting a little high on the contract scale. But this is only going to touch 21 by the end of it, I believe, which for a guard, a guy that can shoot a little bit in this league, say shoot a little bit, like very loosely, I think it's a good deal. I think it makes a lot of sense on the books, and they really, really, really couldn't afford to lose him one way or another. Like he's not an ideal third piece, but once you lost him, I think the floodgates were really going to open on this whole thing falling apart. So it was great that they were able to get it done.
Yeah, I think you made a lot of good points. The first thing is the fact that Boston has lost so many guys in free agency over the years that, like,
You got a guy who wanted to stay.
yeah, Horford leaves, Kyrie bolts, Hayward leaves, Fournier's gone. It's like this team has taken so many and like obviously at varying degrees here. Fournier leaving sort of I think was expected by the time it actually happened. The Hayward stuff and Kyrie leaving and Horford leaving are all different levels of like gut blows. But
I
Marcus
want to
Smart,
hit on Fournier in just a second, but yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
well, Smart leaving the Celtics. I think I probably wouldn't have got out of bed for like a week. I probably just would have sat there with like Coldplay in the background and just like sit there and look out the window like very very like solemnly. So I think Marcus the intangible stuff everybody talks about, but like especially to this Celtics team and like what he's meant to this team over the years, as like the first guy of the rebuild that they got, and is the longest tenured Celtic right now, and that kind of means something because he is like the heart and soul of the team in terms of energy and stuff. It's not like Al Horford or Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum. We've talked about their leadership styles, but those guys, you know aren't really super vocal. Like we know Marcus is vocal. We know that he gets hot in the locker room and that he can make an impact in that way. I in terms of the money, I like again the $77 million is the cap, which is just super fortunate for Boston because like let's say if they end up trading him down the line, that is an amazing contract in terms of value, but it's a decent sized number to try and like push a couple things together to get somebody. And he has a 15% trade kicker, I believe, as a part of that deal. I think I saw that somewhere.
Yeah,
Um,
it was a great deal for him and the Celtics in
yeah,
that sense because he'll continue to get floated in deals and things like that. And if it
right.
does, he gets that little pay boost, and they get that much more toward matching salary. So no player option, which is good for Boston too to some degree. So it's a full 5 guaranteed years, and I think it's probably a little bit of a kickback for the money he lost in that last free agency, at least from his perspective, because they got him on a smaller deal than he probably deserved last time.
Well, and again, it still feels like awesome value. Like I was looking at it this morning on Spot Track, and right now, this year, 2021, 2022, Smart's going to make about 14 million against the Caps, the 87th highest salary in the
Well,
league.
that's still his
Yeah,
contract
that's
that he's
from
on
it's
right
that it
now.
doesn't
Yeah.
kick in until next year, right? So
Yeah.
it makes as
Hmm.
much as like this year he makes as much as Patrick Beverly. Like okay, gun to your head, do you want Pat Beverly or Marcus Smart? I think the answer is obviously Smart. He's a
Yeah.
much better shooter, and a much more versatile. Like Pat Beverly can guard guards, and some like fours, but like I don't see Pat Beverly like boxing out Porzingis and like really mixing it up with centers in that particular regard. So I think look, Pat Beverly is a nice player. He's been traded what twice this offseason already. Kind of tells you what you need to know about Patrick Beverly. But when this extension kicks in 2022, 2023, moves about 10 spots, and that puts him around like Duncan Robinson, Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby. Like that's extremely good. And first off, like that OG Anunoby contract is spectacular for the Toronto Raptors. What a great contract that is. But like
I
that's
love the Raptors.
pretty excellent value for Marcus Smart, like financially. And look, Marcus, I'm curious what he looks like with Ime. Like Jay King had that great quote the other day from like a buddy of Ime, and I'm gonna paraphrase it here. It was like, yeah, Ime's super pumped about having Marcus Smart. Like you watch what they do together, they're gonna be amazing for each other because Ime loves defense, Smart's calling card is defense. And the question you have to ask yourself at this point with Marcus, and I'm curious what you think, is that they're gonna put the ball in his hands a lot more. Is Marcus ready for that particular role? Because if he can handle that, again, that $17 million contract, in 2022, 23, looks excellent if he can do that full time.
Yeah, and I think we're going to be interested to see him in that role this year. You almost wanted to see that before he got the extension here. And now there's the possibility he could have played extremely well this year and made even more than this on the open market. I don't think that was a huge concern, but I am interested to see how he's going to look as a full-time point guard. We saw bits and pieces of it last year. In many ways, it was almost his best passing season. Just in terms of assists and assist rate and all that stuff, because he got to fill in for Kemba a lot. But I've always liked them at that lead guard spot. Their best lineups over the years have been, at least defensively, with him at that point of attack point guard spot. And I just always loved his lob throwing ability, his willingness to make the right play on the ball and pass around, and his instincts in that regard, I think, are one of the best parts of his game, probably second to his defense, his just all around passing ability. And this is what I keep going back to with him. Like you got the intangibles, but coming out of college, he was just an all-around great point guard prospect. Like he could score, he could pass, he was an awesome defender. He had all three of those things going for him. And he sort of got thrust into this like wing help role, secondary shooter, secondary ball handler role alongside whether it was Kyrie, Isaiah, Kemba, those sort of things. So he's always overcompensating for something. I think he's in a really good position to succeed on this group. The one concern you have is the spacing because all their guards really have some shooting concerns now, and their wings are great shooters, but not necessarily spacers. Those are guys that are going to be playmakers in Jalen and Jason too a lot of the time. So they'll have some spacing concerns here, but they have a lot of playmakers. They have a lot of guys that can dribble. They have a lot of guys that can score across this lineup now. So I think it's really going to take the pressure off Marcus to some degree and allow him to really just be a creator, which I think is long overdue. And I wrote that about a month ago when they could have traded him, they could have extended him, they could have done all kinds of things with him. But I said, I'm really excited to see him finally get full control of this point guard spot. And I think that is the kind of role he's going to be in this year. And I'm excited about it because we've seen bits and pieces of it over the years. We really have, like him having full control of the offense. And I think he plays a different style when he's in that kind of role. He's not focused on spacing the floor and shooting a lot of threes. We saw it in the Brooklyn series. He was able to score and balance managing the offense, and he had a really good series. So I'm thrilled to see him run that position on this team, because I think they're almost going to take on his identity, and they have a lot of guys who reflect his identity now, which is something Brad Stevens talked about yesterday. They're more gritty team. They're more ball movement oriented team, certainly, which is something Ime Udoka is going to want. And yeah, he really has spoken up Marcus throughout this whole process here. Now, I don't think this extension's a shining indictment of his future, or endorsement of his future, rather, with the team. I don't think they're locked in on him being a core piece of 2026 the way it is on paper. I think a lot of this has to do as much with the numbers and the trade maneuvering kind of stuff, the flexibility that they've talked about, as much as it is that they love Marcus Smart. So I think there's a little bit of hedging going on here, which is fair. Like, you kind of have to hedge a lot of different opportunities and possibilities going into the future. And one of them's keeping him here long term, which I think is fine, as well as using him as a trade piece. The question you do have on this deal is how much other teams would value Smart at this position. And that's where his production this year at that spot really is going to come into play. If a guy really wants to come to Boston, a team will take Smart. If you're really pushing to get something from another team, I still think it's fair to question whether Jaylen Brown would still have to be a centerpiece of that deal, and Smart would just kind of be a side guy for, I don't know, someone like Damian Lillard.
I don't know if they want to get like. I do think when you listen to like Lowe and Woj a couple weeks ago, like I do think they want to keep Jaylen and build around Jaylen and Jason.
Mm-hmm.
They I think it was like Zach was talking, and Zach was talking about how Boston doesn't want to include Jaylen Brown in any discussion for Brad Beal, and like it looked like Woj was like, yeah, I'm hearing the same thing. Like I don't think they want to get rid of Jaylen either, for a myriad of reasons. One, he just keeps getting better and scores like 25 a game. So like you want guys that can score 25 a game on your roster. The one thing you have something smart though is like, look, now you're giving Marcus Smart like not the keys to the car, so to speak, because like I think that probably still belongs to Jason Tatum, but Smart's role in this offense is going to be crucially important. I think we've learned maybe over the years that having a score first like point guard with Jaylen and Jason might not be the best idea, because like those guys need shots, and Smart's gonna have to understand that. And like this is where Ime being a good communicator is gonna really come into play here. And that's all we've heard. Like we haven't seen Ime coach a single game yet, and it's for the Boston Celtics or for anybody. But the thing that you hear over and over and over and over again about Ime Udoka is the fact that he is a phenomenal communicator. And I think this will be a great test for Ime's communication skills. Can he make Marcus Smart into a more efficient playmaker who's like, I got to get my guys the ball, they need the ball first before I think about my shot. And the Smart selection over the years has been maddening. I think we all can admit that. But like he needs to understand, like, and you can tell with good point guards, like Peyton Pritchard, watching him in summer league or watching, certain guys in summer league, like certain point guards understand, like my job is to get guys the ball. Like I can score, I can shoot, I can do all that stuff, but my job is to make my teammates' lives a lot easier.
How do you feel about that with Smart? Because I think people have different perceptions about it.
He
Like,
can
some
do
people
that.
think
He can do that. He's like, the one thing I missed about Smart is like Marcus Smart's an amazing low post playmaker.
yeah.
Like he is an incredibly good passer on the block. I think given the opportunity, there is real upside there. Someone that understands that he's not there primarily to score the ball, but he's there primarily to help his guys, put them in good places to succeed, and the defensive end, like, kind of run the show. So, like, if he just understands that and buys into that, there's a really fun version of Marcus Smart. But I'm not sure if we've gone too far the other way, because it was a good part of his development to learn how to shoot. Like if you go back to his first year and now, the confidence that I have that his shot's going in is significantly different. But like you don't need Marcus Smart taking 11 shots, 12 shots, 13 shots a game. And if you put the ball into his hands a little bit more, you're a little bit worried about maybe that happening. But if he can settle in 8, 9, and 10, and they're all good shots, and can really facilitate, the numbers for assists, like I don't really look for a number. I just look for how the ball moves. and him being the guy that brings ball before, it starts with him. So if the ball's moving and the shot selection is a little bit better and his total shots are down, like could be extremely valuable here for Marcus Smart.
Yeah, for sure. And the tricky thing about it is that he sort of leveraged himself into a playmaker by taking a lot of risk and kind of becoming a little bit erratic and unpredictable against defenses. The problem is, he's not a great finisher. He's a really poor finisher, frankly, at his size. And he is a poor shooter. Like, I think we just have to admit that just in terms of the numbers on the paper and what he's done throughout his career. It's going to be hard for him to leverage himself as a shooter and play in control and be able to play make, because you got to, if you're a point of attack playmaker, you got to be able to be a threat to score. And sometimes he's going to have to take a lot of risks people don't like in order to make the defense, cover him and account for him and, collapse on his drives and stuff like that so he can make play makes. I love your point about the low post creation too. That's something I'd love to see he may do a little bit more, because he's a phenomenal post up guard. If he can get smaller guys on that block, that's a great place for him to score efficiently and make plays out of. That's not something Stevens did much of at all, just based on how his offense worked there. So they're gonna have to put him in positions to succeed, specifically with spacing. I think it's gonna be really interesting how this team tries to space the perimeter, because frankly the ball is gonna be in Tatum and Brown's hands a lot to create. That's something Ime's talked about as well. So where does that leave Smart on certain sets? It's obviously not going to be a phenomenal floor spacer for those guys. And he's a good off-ball mover, stuff like that. But they're going to have to get creative in the way they space these lineups, because Schroeder, not a good shooter over the length of his career. Richardson, they keep talking up his shot coming around, but it's been about 3 years since he's been a good shooter at this point.
Yeah,
And
back in Miami.
Al's a good shooter for a center, but he's not much of a floor spacer, I'd say, especially at this point in his career. So they have a shooting problem here, and that's really where the utilization of Pritchard and Nesmith is going to come into play. They're going to have to carve out some sort of roles here, specifically Pritchard, because we really know he can shoot. Like,
Yeah.
that's the one part of his game that's certain, and he's added distance at this point. Smart might find himself in a position where he's going to have to overcompensate a little bit again for some of Pritchard's defensive shortcomings and try to make him a little bit more playable on the court, because they're going to need his shooting pretty badly. And I think there's a chance that you could see Pritchard and Smart playing together on the floor quite a bit this year, even though you have Richardson, even though you have Schroeder. They're going to have to find a way to get some shooting on the floor with these guys, because their backcourt just doesn't have much of it. Never mind Chris Dunn, who I don't even know how he factors into this backcourt.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Chris Dunn's on the roster when we tipped the ball off for the first game. But the one thing before we move on here, I am curious about like a Smart Richardson pairing. That is going to be a nightmare, I think, offensively.
Yeah,
Although
I don't like it.
Richardson apparently is that there is some thought out there that Richardson, if you put the ball in his hands a little more, could be a much better offensive player. But I think on the defensive side, when you have those two guys, if you can give Smart like some help in terms of like you're not always guarding, the primary ball handler. Like if you can make his job a little bit easier, because again, we look at his off ball stuff sometimes. You're like, how in the hell did he freaking see that? How did he end up there? How did he do this? I am curious to that on the defensive side. I think offensively, that's gonna be a little bit of a nightmare. We got to
Well,
move
that's the
on.
thinking here, right? Like, this
Yeah,
team's gonna be really good on defense, and that's
yeah.
sort of what they're trying to carve this out around.
Those are old school Brad teams. The
Mhm.
last year I kept harping on the show. You've heard it a million times. This team defensively was so annoying last year, because it was like this is the first year in the history of like Brad Stevens where this team absolutely sucks defensively.
Late
And
in the year, they were as bad as anyone.
yeah, I'm gonna draw it to a fluke, because most of the time, they were a really excellent defensive team. Before we do move on, though, I do want to get this last point, and I want to make it kind of quick because we have to move on here. But like I was listening to Chris Vernon and Kevin O'Connor this week, Mismatch, of course, The Ringer, great show. Vernon was talking about how he had heard from some people that like Smart's contract limbo. You know how with guys in contract years, it's like some guys perform really well because they're just like, I got to hunt money and I got to have a really good season, so I can't afford to be bad, and they have like their best statistical year ever. Vernon was talking about how he had heard that Smart, because of his uncertainty with his future in terms of contract status and whether he's with the team or not, like that really mentally affected him. So like everybody last year said like Smart's defense slipped. I'm not sure if it's he's declining athletically, if he's hurt, if it's like the COVID year, like whatever. Like we didn't see the same Marcus Smart last year. So his point being, now that Smart has a new contract, he has a little more financial stability, whether it's with Boston or somebody else. Like he's going to perform a lot better. You've been to put any stock into that theory at all?
I think so, and I think that was an important consideration. There was obviously a Mannix report out there that had to come from someone on the inside that his stand, and Jared wrote about it too with the Athletic, that his standing in the room was degrading a little bit. Guys were tuning Smart out, never mind Brad. And so you had to sort of reinstill his status with the team, and I think an extension was a way to go about that, to the point where I think you accomplished two things. Obviously, placating his future here, him getting paid, him feeling like he's part of the leadership structure in the room here legitimately. And I also think what was so important with this year's group, and I think has been resolved now, is this wasn't going to be the holdover team for Beal. Like everybody just looking around saying like, all right, we're not even going to be here in a year. I think Bernardoni tweeted about this too. Like, how are you even going to root for a lot of these guys, knowing that many of them are going to be gone in a Beal scenario there? At least now there's some sort of hedge that like, all right, there's still a chance some of these guys could be gone for Beal, but their improvement and development could go toward internal improvement too here. And
Right.
continue to carry forward this core. So I think that was a very huge part of the Smart extension too. It's hard to ignore with all the noise we've heard about Smart standing in the locker room.
Yeah, and there's more to come here. And I do want to get into summer league at some point here on this show, but I do want to just move on quickly because the Boston Celtics created a new TPE. Sign and trade for the Knicks. They sent over a fake second round pick to the Knicks to create a $17.1 million traded player exception. It feels like just a Boston staple at this point. Mike Zarin, I think it might be like his favorite thing ever to create TPEs to give themselves certain cap flexibilities, which I think is pretty smart. It reminds me kind of like the New Orleans Saints, what they've been doing the past couple of years with signing bonuses and trying to like kick the can down there a little further so they can like ride out Drew Brees as much as humanly possible. But now that Brees is retired, their team is a little in tough shape. I think maybe that's what Boston did this offseason here by resetting things. But they created another TPE, $17.1 million. A couple of guys that make that kind of money. Bertans, of course, over in Washington. Steven Adams. I think that's unlikely. I love Steven Adams. He's a great guy, but I'm not sure if he fits this roster. Malik Beasley, Christian Wood, a couple other guys that fit like that number. But I feel
DeJounte
like,
Murray's the one people love. You
yeah,
could
but
finally fit him into there.
I don't know if that's going to be the guy. Like, I feel like now that we saw that it with the Gordon Hayward TP, this feels like, okay, they'll go after somebody with a smaller salary and use some of it and then push down the line to, next.
Yeah, like split it in half. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what they're going to do. I think it's smart that they do this kind of stuff. I mean, it saved them a little bit. I mean, with the Kyrie debacle, the fact that they were able to get Kemba through different venues and creating that sign and trade and whatever. And they've been able to manipulate a few things and save face a few different ways. Like you don't just lose Gordon Hayward. You at least got something and got something and got something and got something. Again, it wasn't the most ideal scenarios all the way through, but they've been able to try and, okay, we didn't totally lose him for nothing. We can keep trying to figure out how to grab certain guys. So I like the fact that they're doing that. I guess the one thing I'll say is like, I think we're numb to the like sexy. It could be this guy in the team. Like, I think we're all numb to that now. I think it's like, all right, look, Boston just did this so they can create some like financial and roster flexibility at some point. They'll probably get two guys with it, and maybe one of them will stick. Like maybe it will. Like maybe they'll get a full year of Josh Richardson here, and it'll be great, and it'll work out, and he can pump up Richardson's trade value or his value next offseason or whatever. Like we'll see how it goes, but like I think we've become reserved to the fact that nothing's real sexy is probably going to happen with this new TPE, Bobby.
Yeah, and I think it's part of a ladder process that we talked about with Smart. Like his salary bump gets you a little closer to matching like a super max Beal type situation, and then these things just sort of stack the deck with contracts here. That's sort of the thinking with Richardson too. Is that all right? Richardson's a good fit on this team, and he's a guy that could help them now. But it's also just preserving that 11 million going forward. You can maybe even sign him to a new deal with the bird rights you have for him now to keep that money on the books here. You could add and the reason you probably wouldn't split that in half, I guess, would be to have one contract that's sizable enough to go toward matching. Like I look at a Thad Young, maybe, making 14 or something like that. You mentioned Beasley. His money definitely fits that bill. You obviously need a guy who's going to have some player value in that sense, but I do think this is part of a ladder process of piling up salaries that are more tradable than what the Celtics have had in the past. They've had these massive salaries. They've had these tiny salaries like Rob Williams and Grant Williams that just don't do anything for you in trades. And really, the team got stuck at many spots the past couple of years because they just couldn't match salary for trades outside of Marcus Smart. So they definitely put themselves in a more flexible situation here. I think we always heard flexibility from them and thought like, all right, they want as much cap space as possible. The encouraging thing here is it sort of flew in the face of two assumptions we made. They might be willing to take on some long-term money here if it's going to be tradable. They might be willing to, extend a guy like Rob Williams possibly at this point because it adds some more money to the books. Like there's more possibilities and routes that they can go now than just clearing the deck of contracts. And I love this because there's just a lot of different ways you can go. You can solidify the team this year a little bit more through this process. Add a guy at the deadline who could really help this team because they're in a good position to win a little bit this year, I think, with what they have right now. They obviously have their picks at their disposal, which is going to help with the TPEs. But I am frustrated with one thing about the Smart situation here, because now we're kind of talking about Fournier. I really liked Fournier. Like especially when we learned that the fourth year was non-guaranteed with him. Was it crazy to bring him back at 3-60? Especially now that you have Smart at 4-77 going forward. You don't need the cap space. He's probably somewhat of a tradable contract in the different scenarios that we kick around here. Like, is he any less tradable than Beasley and Young and some of these guys we kick around? I thought he was a great fit on this roster beyond it all. He brought spacing. He brought secondary playmaking. He had a few monster scoring games in there in the handful of games that he played with the team here. And it really doesn't feel like they engaged him at all about bringing him back, which I understood if you were going to keep the deck cleared cap-wise. But now that you've kept Smart, I think Fournier would have been a great pair for him, the Jays, and would have been probably somewhat movable going forward. You get through this 1 year, you have 2 guaranteed years left after. And, he probably would have been much more movable at that point. They probably have some idea of what his value is around the league, and maybe that turned them off to having that versus a TP here. But again, you have to use picks. You have to give up some sort of value here going forward to actually turn this TP into something. And it's not going to be as good as Evan Fournier in my mind.
Yeah, and Fournier's like as your first option is not a great idea, but when he's your fourth or your third, it looks a lot better. And like
it felt like a lot of Celtics fans didn't like him. I did.
I like Fournier. The problem with Fournier was like everybody remembers he went like 0 for a million to start, and then what was good, then got COVID, then took time to get back. So we never really got a solid idea of what like Fournier looks like when he's fully integrated in the system. And yeah, I would have loved to see that, but like at the same time, paying him 20 million, like do you want to pay him 20 million? I
kind of, if you're a shooter in this league and he can shoot, he had 7 of 11 games from 3. I haven't seen a Celtic do that in a long time.
Well, I think also too that maybe Boston got scared of like, okay, what if he just kicks ass in the Olympics? And like they made the move early to get Richardson and just say like that's going to be our, that's going to be the guy we go with instead of we'll just wave by to Fournier. And I think they got maybe a little scared of like what that looks like later on. But I think they just wanted to move quickly and just have like their roster set. I do think that they want to have this whole thing pretty much wrapped up. And the only thing now is like, what do they do with Robert Williams? They wanted to have like an idea in place for Ime to give him like again his full roster pretty early in the off season. I think there's some value to that. I mean, look, I like Fournier as a player. I think he fit Boston really well. He provided them again that secondary playmaking, is a good off ball mover. The ball doesn't really stick with him. He's a good player. I am curious how he fits in New York. Not everybody's made for that spotlight, and Thibodeau is. We'll see how he works. Yeah, we'll see how Kemba's knee holds up, and we'll see if Fournier holds up with Thibodeau here as well. So I am curious. I'd like Fournier, but I think at 20 million, when you're trying to preserve like long-term flexibility, I think that somewhat hinders you a little bit here. But again, it's not like I don't like the player. I liked Fournier. I thought it was a good dart throw, so to speak. And I think it would have worked out better if again the guys were healthier. But this was just the season from hell last year, so. It's just unfortunate.
We'll see. I think he still would have kept some flexibility, and I just hope it isn't tax. We'll see where they go with this tax thing. Brad said yesterday that they'll pay the tax. They'll go deeper into the tax. That's why they didn't want to hard cap themselves. I always thought Fournier was partially letting him go. Actually, was partially tax motivated because he would have been a substantial
Yeah.
money commitment to ownership through the tax, and maybe that's not a guy that's worth doing that. But this TP is going to be tax money too, so we'll see if they actually do commit to something with that this year.
Yeah, that's the thing that everybody was like, oh, the Celtics front office and their ownership's being cheap, and I was like, well, yeah, I definitely get that, but I'm not sure if they're totally convinced with Brooklyn the way they're set up that this team is going to win a title this upcoming season, but we'll see with that. The well-traveled Bobby Manning here on Celtics Beat here this week, and I want to get Bobby on because Bobby was literally in Vegas for the summer league. I was so jealous. I've always wanted to go to that. Maybe when we get more normal, I'll be able to actually attend that particular event. I love summer league. Bobby also loves summer league. We like watching the younger guys, make a name for themselves in the league and see what they got before we get to the real NBA season. And I have a bunch of stuff I want to get to, but Bobby, I guess I'll start is what in your mind for Boston, what was the biggest storyline to you coming out of summer league now that it's all over? What's the biggest thing or the biggest box that you've checked, or what is the biggest storyline coming out of summer league for you?
So you did have two guys, I think, in Peyton Pritchard and Aaron Nesmith, who separated themselves from the pack there a bit. I think Pritchard made the first team. Nesmith probably should have made the second team. I don't think he did in the end, but those are two guys who, once they got rolling, they had a slow first half in that Atlanta game. You want to see second-year players just look like they don't even belong there. And for large stretches of this, those two in Nesmith and Pritchard really didn't look like they belonged here. But I do actually have to go to Romeo Langford as my big storyline out of there because he didn't separate himself all that much. And this is a third-year guy. And then by the end of it was hurt again, which was just unbelievable. Like every single time you start to develop and get a sense and feel for him, I actually do kind of believe his approach and that he was trying to play a role like he would play in the regular season. So I was a little less harsh on him than you would probably be with a guy averaging 10, 11 points a game out there shooting 44%. His three ball looked good. I'll give him that. There were a few areas he looked stronger. He got to the basket a little bit, powering himself there, but he still didn't show much separation from guys. Still didn't try all this creative stuff that Pritchard and Nesmith were doing out there to try to expand their games a little bit, which is what I think summer league's all about. And I just got a feel for a guy whose confidence is really just in a shaky place with everything he's been through and just where he's at on this roster and in this league. Like he has kind of positioned himself into a corner here where he just thinks he has to cling to this defensive role. And I do think there's a little bit more there for him at this point on the offensive end of the ball, because you don't want him to just be a 0-0-0 guy out there who's chasing defensive assignments. I don't think he's going to be able to get on the floor and play a huge role on this team into the future doing that. There may be matchups and spots where he can be helpful in that sense, but you pick the guy 14, you want to kind of bigger horizons for him, and it still just doesn't feel like that's there with him at this point, whether it's a physical skill set thing or a mental thing for him at this point. And I don't knock him for kind of being in a tough place mentally because he's just been through this extraordinary run of injuries and misfortune that just continues every single time he gets on the court again. We don't know how hurt he is with this latest wrist ailment, but that was just such a fitting end to his summer league because every single time he's back on the court, there's just another issue around the corner. So that was a big storyline of summer league for me. You had some guys that really look good, but that's the guy you want to see kind of take the next step here and expand beyond what he is, and he really didn't.
Yeah, I was good. I wasn't sure when we would do the Romeo stuff because I think his development is a huge factor here for Boston. Like they need the fact that he's playable defensively and a really good player on that end is at least helpful to them. Like another wing defender. I mean, you can never have too many wing defenders, in my opinion. I think that's a huge part of today's game. So at least there's that. I'll at least start with that. There's a positive there. His shot does look better. He looks more confident in it. It's a little bit. It's like shorter. It's smaller. It's more compact, which is good. He's clearly definitely come a long way in that regard. But I'm with you. Like I'm just not quite sure Is he just going to be a 3-and-D guy? Like, is that all he's going to be?
Is he semi? Like,
Yeah, but
you
like
can't believe that.
Shemi, I love Shemi. Like Shemi could hold up a little bit differently just because of his girth, like in his like low center of gravity, he could kind of bang with like bigger guys a little bit more. I don't think Romeo has that kind of flexibility because I just don't think he's strong enough at this point. I remember he's on the younger side still, but I'm looking for a little more out of Romeo, and I'm with you. Was a little like there were points where you're like, oh, like he had a couple of like huge dunks. You're
He
like,
had a
I didn't know
game-winning
he could
shot.
do that.
Yeah.
He hits the game winner from the corner. You're like, oh, okay. But you like, we're all waiting for this like shot creator, facilitator Romeo Langford that we kind of saw in Indiana. And you see it a little bit more with his high school tape, and we just haven't seen it. Now maybe Romeo's just not that guy at an NBA level. Like maybe that's just it. We haven't been able to see it because, again, as you alluded to, he's just hurt all the friggin' time. He's hurt constantly, and it's affected his development for sure because he's never had a normal offseason like ever. This is supposed to be the first normal offseason for Romeo Langford in 3 years where he has time after the offseason to practice, wind down, lift weights, get stronger, all that stuff. Then he has the summer league where you go test your skills and see what you need to work on afterwards. And he can't even get through that without getting hurt. So it's just like, is this guy like just Mr. Glass, essentially, right? Like, I love Romeo. I love the idea of Romeo. If Romeo's a 3-and-D guy, okay, that's fine. Romeo, you try to do a little bit better than that at 14, but it could be worse, right? You could have a pick where it's like Trey Lyles, and Trey Lyles like can't play, right? I loved him coming out of Kentucky. I thought he was going to be an amazing stretch floor in the league, and like just hasn't cut it. So there's that scenario as well. But we're all waiting to see like what does Romeo look like with the ball in his hands, and the times that he does have in his hands, a lot of the times he doesn't make great decisions. I mean, there are times where he looks great, then there are times that he doesn't. Maybe he just needs more seasoning in that role, but like he's not going to get seasoning in that role a lot when he plays for Boston. Like that's not going to be his job. So I don't know. Like I'm encouraged in some aspects, discouraged in some aspects, and then the injury thing. I'm just like, I throw my hands up in the air. So it's like,
well, yeah, he's in a spot where he's fortunate they didn't have another first round pick this year, because that's just another guy coming in there competing for minutes, and that's something that happens every single year. And even a guy relatively young like him can end up getting pushed out of the league just because there's so much talent coming in year in and year out. So there will eventually come a point where I think you take on a different project and it's from a different location, maybe a guy that didn't work on a different team. And this is something I've talked about with Grant too. If these guys stagnate, you do kind of want to see the Celtics take a different direction at some point. Maybe not necessarily this year, but definitely next year if those two guys just struggle to get involved again this season. So that's sort of how it goes in this league. This is Romeo's last shot, I think, at factoring into the Celtics plans this year. And you have a guy like Aaron Nesmith, who I think is at least on his level at this point. I think the underrated thing about Romeo is that defensive floor was obviously a place he got favor from Stevens, at least relative to Nesmith. That could be something that Ime feels the same way about. So I'm going to hold the phone on saying Nesmith has raced ahead of Langford. I think they're in a relatively similar spot, but Nesmith's getting better. His defense, I think we got to see it in a real environment. It's hard to pull from that end of the floor in summer league, but he was scoring off the dribble. He was hitting some step back looks in the corner. He really can shoot. Like he's not a pure shooter like I think we were expecting him coming out of college. He'll have some bad misses. He'll have some rough stretches, but in the aggregate, I think Nesmith is definitely a 40% three-point shooter in this league, and can really make it happen beyond the arc, and do a ton of stuff for you in that regard. Rebounding, I love from him. He's a very aggressive rebounder. Obviously has the physique to defend, and once he gets down the playbook and the different like schemes and things you have to do at this level to succeed on that end of the floor, I think he'll end up being good there too. Just a little bit of playmaking too splashed in summer league. So I love what Nesmith did. He played a great role down the stretch of the year last year, especially in that San Antonio win. He was awesome in that game. There were a handful of others where he looked like he could be a starting player in this league. He has a little bit of a ways to go here too, but at least he's taken the steps. We haven't seen Langford progress in the way that Nesmith has already through a year and change at this point. So like Nesmith could overtake Langford fast there, and I think it's already starting to happen.
Well, I think there's a little difference, like in energy between those two guys. Like Nesmith is all over the place. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he's just constantly moving. Whether it's in the right direction or wrong direction is another question entirely. But he's just constantly moving and flying all over the court, and the energy that he brings on both ends is just kind of fun. You know, in terms of Romeo versus Nesmith, like it's and it's not like Nesmith's bad defensively. I think Nesmith needs more seasoning on that end, where he just needs to be in the system more. He needs to understand, you know, the rotations more, understand the switching more, and I think he'll be fine. I think Romeo's had a little more development on that end and has been able to kind of integrate himself into the Celtics rotation more on that end. But the offensive stuff you see from Nesmith, and it was more like off the dribble stuff, like balls in his hands, attacking the basket. Like that's the stuff I want to see. Like I don't want Nesmith just to be strictly a shooter. You know, like I think he can shoot. I think it's pretty obvious he can shoot. And the looks he'll get in the NBA versus what he got at summer league are going to be different, right? He's going to be on the floor with certain guys, and like, okay, if Tatum and Brown on the floor at the same time as Nesmith, like Nesmith's going to have some open shots. Okay, the space is going to be way different. Nesmith can really shoot it. I'm not sure if I prescribe to that he's a streaky shooter versus he's a really like he is a pure shooter. I think there are moments where you're like, yeah, that shot he can repeat it. It's short, it's quick, not a lot of moving parts. It's hard to block. And when he's really feeling it, he's really feeling it. And there are days where he's going to struggle a little bit because again, he's young. You know, he hasn't played that many NBA minutes yet. But you can just see like this is going to be an energy type player. Like he'll come on the floor, bring energy, and uplift the team a little bit if they need it. Like there's the stuff that with the balls in his hands, he gets, you know, he hasn't the best handle right now, and he doesn't totally know where he's going all the time. Like he'll just try to drive to the basket, and then he'll try and do a couple other things, and it's like it gets a little murky. Probably shouldn't have done that. Probably should take a little, fewer dribbles and know that you don't have it. You got to give it up or just take it, or you just rise and fire or something like that. But that's like summer league is the time to experiment with that stuff, right? That's the time for you to maybe grow your game a little bit and go a little bit outside of your comfort zone. So I like the fact that Nesmith tried some stuff, right?
Yeah.
We know he's going to be a shooter, but at least he tried. Let's try being a little more facilitated. Let's be a little bit more of a guy that attacks off the dribble. Like at least we got to see that because I do think there is a little mid-range game to his repertoire, so to speak. Like I remember, I think Stackhouse compared him to like Allen Houston a little bit, and there is a little bit of that mid-range game there. I mean, Allen Houston obviously, in the '90s was the maestro of the mid-range. Who was a phenomenal mid-range player. And I think there's a little bit of that in there, and that gets kind of lost in today's game a little bit. But I loved what I saw from him. I'm not sure if I would vote him all Summer League second team, but I'm very, 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 very encouraged his development. And when you had him and Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard on the floor at the same time, like just so much good floor spacing, so many good shooters. It was like I'm like, this is what I want. I want all this
Yeah,
all the
that team
time.
could really
This is
shoot.
beautiful.
Yeah, they separated themselves big time in most of those games with their shooting and just how much talent they had across the floor. And I don't even think we'll get to all the things we saw from the summer league team. Juhan looking physically like he could compete at this level. Yam, I think, showed some good things early. The Celtics, I think, liked what they saw from him overall. But one thing I thought was interesting for a lot of the guys, though, and I just kind of took this from Romeo, is that they haven't gotten to know Ime all that much yet. He was there. I think he briefly met all those summer league guys once he got in from Vegas, but there hasn't been a big conversation with Nesmith, certainly not with Romeo and Pritchard and those guys about what their role is going to be this year. So will Nesmith have the freedom to shoot a little bit more mid-range stuff? Will Ime be expecting Romeo to be a little more aggressive on the offensive side of the floor? Like those are questions I don't think those guys had definitive answers to coming in the summer league. I think they had clear guidance on like where they needed to improve, and Mazzulla communicated that pretty good. And I thought Mazzulla was an awesome coach for
Yeah.
that group.
Yep.
It was great getting to know him, and just the way he connected with those guys seemed pretty authentic. So I think everybody came out of this a little bit better. Bruno Fernando, even, I thought, showed some good stuff,
My
just
guy.
in terms of an energizer. Yeah, it looks like he could make this team, actually, because I thought he would be one of the lead guys who would be cut in that loaded front court there. But he has a little something in terms of energy, I think, that could be helpful if you need to go to him in a depth spot at that position. And they certainly have their injury concerns and age concerns at that position. So I think he came out and made the team. I think Carson Edwards, maybe not in Boston, but saved his NBA career with some of the stuff he showed. Like, I think he can latch on with a different team based off what he showed out here, because it's probably not going to happen in Boston for him. So it was just a feel good week for the team. Never mind the Schroeder signing that started the week, and really changed the fortune of this team talent wise going into the year. Just the strides that these young guys who across the board, I don't think we were sure going into Summer League were going to take a next step or be able to separate themselves from a field. Through 3 games to have the best team in Summer League by far, with your 2 first-round picks last year who were kind of up and down through the course of that season, just tearing teams apart. I mean, Nesmith had a 33-point game. Pritchard was the best player in Summer League on a points per possession basis through 3 games. That was inspiring stuff. And now you take it all with a grain of salt. You try to contextualize like how it actually translates. But when the bar coming in was, can these guys separate themselves at all? And then they start dominating the way they did. That was great to see. And of course, the last game was a disaster, but 4 out of the 5 games they played ended up being really good. So I think that was the overwhelming sentiment coming out of it.
Yeah, kudos to Davion Mitchell, who looked
Yeah,
amazing.
he blew up that spot. He
He
really
was
did.
amazing, man. I loved him at Baylor. I loved the fact that he's
I am
just a tenacious
stunned he's
defender.
not on the Warriors.
I know. I loved him. I thought it would be I don't know. I'm a big Davion Mitchell fan. I love his defense. But like the one thing I'll say as we try and wrap things up pretty quickly here is like I just love the way this team moved the ball. Like if what we saw from Joe Mazzulla and this Celtics Summer League team is like the one thing I loved was they moved the freaking
You
basketball.
got Carson to move the ball a little
I mean,
bit.
I mean, it was like it was so fun and refreshing to watch. And if that's what this team's gonna look like with a whole new vision here, and I thought again, as you said, I thought Joe Mazzulla did a freaking fantastic job.
They looked like a team,
They
and
looked
that never
awesome.
happens in Summer
I
League.
know they look great. So again, kudos to him. I love the way this team moved the ball. They got after it defensively. You know, they were suffocating at times. Like the last game, they were it's such a nightmare of turnovers. It was turnover central. But like
Yeah,
other stuff,
Pritchard got some humbling after the 92 for sure.
yeah, and like I want to save Pritchard for last, but like Bruno Fernando, I fell in love with in like 5 minutes. Like I think he played his way onto the team somehow. And you look at Brad talked about it yesterday about how they have one more two-way spot, and like I'm kind of hoping that Fernando, if he's not on the roster, somehow ends up in the last two-way spot, because man, he played his ass off and he brings a lot of energy. I
Yeah,
love him. Sam Hauser, I
I'm
just
glad you
don't
mentioned him. He was a great find.
I don't know how after watching what I saw, it's like, how did Sharif Cooper fall to the second round? How did Sam Hauser not get drafted in a league that's predicated on like primarily shooting? Can you shoot threes? Like that's like one of the biggest questions. That guy can really,
That's a
really,
pure shot.
really shoot,
Hmm.
and like he'll get a two-way spot, which is great. At some point, I think he'll play for Boston. I think because just like that's a pure shot. And if you can find a way to just get him some run in the G League and get him comfortable in your schemes and at least playing all the time, I think eventually you'll see him in Boston as a really key bench guy. You don't see guys like that too often,
Yeah,
and
he's
he lit it up.
he struggles defensively is why he fell out of the draft. And KOC did have him in his top 60. I heard that in the mismatch too when they were kicking around Boston stuff.
Yeah,
But yeah, Stevens, I talked to one of his coaches at Virginia. I got a profile on him coming out Sunday, but everybody in his past says like it's clear if he's out defending in space, it's gonna be a problem, and that's what you have to do in this league. So that's the kind of stuff they're gonna want him to work on in Maine. But offensively, he is gonna factor into this. The spacing stuff we talked about, a stretch 4 like him, and he could rebound a little bit. He's got great size. I think he's 6'8". He he's gonna play for Boston this year for sure.
Yeah. I'm so sold on the shot. And again, what he does, your spacing and the gravity of the floor is really great.
He went 10 for 12 through 12 shots at one point in summer league. That was unreal.
I was like falling over, and I think I forget, was it Beth Mowens doing the game, and she was like freaking out over the fact that he was just like still draining shots, and it felt like that great. There's that great Larry Bird. I forget what year it was, and the people are gonna yell at me because I should know better. But it's the Larry Bird game against the Hawks where he's just like firing from all over the place, and the guys on the Atlanta Hawks bench are like falling over. They're laughing so hard because Larry's just draining an unreal amount of shots. And I think Fratello is the coach of the Hawks at the time. And he like got on, he like yelled at his guys like you should not be cheering for like the other team like the way you guys are doing for Larry. Like it's just not way to go. Like that's how it felt with like Hauser just pulling up from all over the place. But I do want to finish up here with Pritchard because this Pritchard looked like, with the one game exception, and Davion again made his life a living hell. And credit to Davion, man, that guy freaking rules. Pritchard looked like he was on another planet than most guys, and I love the way he plays, his tempo, the way he plays at his own speed. He gets guys involved. He's a great shooter. He gets inside. He's not afraid to draw contact. All that stuff. Like I love Pritchard, and I walked away from like, man, he's going to be really impactful for this basketball team this upcoming season. He's like, he gives like, I'm curious to see what Shooter does. No question. But Pritchard and that Fred VanVleet like comp that I just can't shake because it's just like, if that's what he is, that's a really amazing player to have. And to find at 24 or wherever they got him is just such a steal. He's just a great player. Got a great head on his shoulders. And, as a backup point guard, he can play there. He can be a shooting guard because his range is limitless. I mean, he's just a perfect player for this team.
Yeah, he was one of the best catch and shoot guys, period, in the league last year. So that was not even something he had to build on, but he did add some range in the summer league, and the scoring that he brings to the table is legit. And you think of the shooting, the scoring, like two things that are at a premium in this league. To get that at late in the first round, as you mentioned, there is going to be Danny Ainge's last gift that keeps on giving here. He had a rough last few years, but I tweeted that out last week. I was like, that might have been his greatest draft steal when it was all said and done was Pritchard, and especially a guy whose pedigree largely on draft boards last year was second round pick because of his size, the defensive concerns, and his playmaking concerns, frankly, have kind of come into play here too. Because last year, the pick and roll, he was a fairly below average player playmaking in those spots, and that prevented him. I think people lost their minds when Smart would be out, Kemba was out, and Brad still wouldn't start Pritchard in those spots. But even here in Summer League, you did see there's a way to go when it comes to him as a playmaker. Celtics held him to a very high standard out there in Vegas in terms of getting other guys involved and being a floor general. And that last disaster of a game they had against Sacramento, I think, still reflects some of the growth he has to undergo to become a great playmaker at the point guard spot. Now, fortunately, they have Smart, they have Richardson, Schroeder, all those guys. He may not be called on all that much to be a playmaker this year, which is good because he is going to excel most just being asked to do what he's great at, which is catch and shoot, wing scoring, play a little bit of that wing spot, I think, is where he's going to be most. You mentioned VanVleet. I think that's a really good role for him on this squad, is a kind of a secondary scoring option, a floor spacer for this group, not a guy who has to run a bunch of pick and roll and be a floor general for them, which is great because 2 weeks ago, we're probably looking at him as the backup point guard with a lot of questions about how much he could jump into that role. Now, I think there's a little bit more leeway for him to be who he is. And with all this defense around him, I think that can kind of compensate for some of his defensive concerns. He's in a great spot to succeed this year, and I think he's going to get a lot more minutes than he did last year. And he was a guy who just looked way too good to be out there on the floor in summer league. Yep. I don't know. Were you as mad as some other people that he took off for Portland?
No, not at all. I just didn't want him to get hurt. That's all. The only thing I cared about. And that's the other thing I want to mention. Nobody got hurt outside of Romeo, and I don't think it's going to be too serious. But like no catastrophic injuries. As of right now, I don't think anybody got COVID, so that's a good thing. The baby steps, little things in life. Like after the season that the Celtics had, I just want to keep that in perspective. That it seems like they'll be healthy as we get ready for training camp here. But with Pritchard, like the one thing, he broke the Celtics Summer League assist record.
Did he? I didn't even know that.
As you said before, yeah, he averaged the most assists per game of anybody in Celtics Summer League history, which is, that's an accomplishment. Okay. Rondo did it. I think he's Rondo's second to Pritchard.
It was a bummer this team couldn't get a ban. Would they have put up a banner in TD? That would have made like the the people who like shake their head about the Celtics and all
if
their.
You're not watching the video. I just rolled my eyes super hard at Bobby for that. Come on now, we're not the Indianapolis Colts. We're not the Indianapolis Colts here, Bobby. The Celtics have won 17 championships, brother. This is not the Colts who hang a banner for getting to the playoffs. Okay.
Oh my God.
But with Pritchard though, like, I love that he's a gamer. I love that he loves playing basketball because, like, to go from summer league to pro-am, scoring 92 and then 50 whatever, then coming back and playing the championship game is like psycho level stuff. But I absolutely love it. And again, Pritchard, like, he would have had more assists if guys could catch. Like he'd get in the paint, like dump it off, and like a guy would fumble out of bounds. It's like, and like Zach August is a nice player. Like
I know. Thank God Fernando arrived halfway through.
Right.
They did not have guys to catch pocket passes.
Awful. It was so awful. Yeah. Bruno would just throw it down with unbelievable authority. So like it was fun to watch it there too. But it's just he would average like 10 a game if guys could just catch the ball on the block and just lay it up or yam it home. So Pritchard again, what a steal, what a find. I loved him pretty much from the minute he started playing because he just brought a whole different bunch of energy. I remember seeing it last week. The shot he beat the Raptors with, like it was like the 4th or 5th game of his career. At the end of the game, he had the game winner against Toronto. I believe it was on the road in Tampa when he did it. And it was like he just snuck in for like the offensive rebound.
I think that was the Heat game. Yeah, I think it was a putback against
I thought it was
Heat.
It's in Florida. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it was just like the legend just continues to grow with him. And again, a guy that just freaking loves playing basketball.
No, he was so ready from day one coming into this league. It was unbelievable. And obviously he was at college for a while. I loved him at Oregon. That was a guy who was on national TV a lot, and those teams were. So I knew who he was coming into the league. And I had a pretty good idea that this guy was the center of everything offensively at Oregon. He was able to carry a heavy load on that end of the floor last year or 2 years ago now with that team. So like I didn't expect what came last year with him, but he was just so ready, just so fundamentally sound. And like you said, like his just obsession with improvement, I think is going to bode so well here. Just a great find. And like, that's another thing. Ainge, I think if you look at his total package over the years in terms of like who he drafted, what he did at certain spots, like he had Bradley, he had Rondo, he had a lot of guys late in these rounds, Rozier, who
Tony Allen
ended up becoming really good players. Yeah. And at those spots, like, even if Pritchard doesn't become like an awesome player or a starter or something like that, like relative to the value of 26, I think it was.
Yeah.
It's just so good. Like some guys at that spot just never play, and he really looks like a guy who should have been closer to the lottery just in terms of his readiness for the league and the scoring and the shooting in particular. The shot is undeniable at this point. He's another guy who's going to be a 40% 3-point shooter in this league.
Already was. Yeah. Can't wait. But summer league, always fun. So jealous that Bobby had to go out there, but did a lot of great coverage for us at CLNS while he was out in Vegas. Of course, works, Boston Sports Journal. He's on Celtics blog. He's doing a bunch of stuff all over the place for anything Syracuse related, whether it's Dome Theory, his podcast there, writing for Syracuse.com, which is a place near and dear to my heart, obviously. Bobby, you need a nap, kid. Go get some rest. Appreciate you being on the show with me today. But again, a guy that was, and for those of you that don't know, extremely valuable to CLNS behind the scenes. I'm glad that you're getting your shine on camera, brother. You definitely earned it. You definitely deserved it, my friend.
Appreciate you having me, Evan. It was fun.
Adam will be back next week. We're taking off for this week. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Enjoy yourselves. But yeah, Adam and I will be back next week. Same time, same place here on Celtics Beat. Bobby Manning, invaluable. The most valuable. I don't even know how to put it. Other than Xanis, I think if we didn't have Bobby Manning, this company would have fallen apart. So appreciate you, Bobby. Have a great rest of your week, sir.
Thanks, Evan.